Hey folks, Ardwulf here. Today we have an unboxing of a brand new game from Multiman Publishing. This is something that I've been waiting for a while. This is Valley of Tears from the Battalion Combat series. This is going to be game number 6 in that series, and that series is really heating up over the last couple of years with some really good games and some real substantive improvements in the game series rules that we've seen over the last couple of games. So this is brand new. As of my filming this, it's only a couple days after the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of this conflict, which is, of course, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, sometimes called the Yom Kippur War or the October War. If we remember the old Avalon or old SPI October War game, same conflict that this is about. So the first thing that I notice immediately is it is in a 3-inch box. That is somewhat unanticipated. As somebody who complains rather a lot about games being in boxes that are too small to accommodate organized components, I am delighted that that is in fact the case. I think we'll see in a second, but I think most folks will have no trouble organizing this into this box in standard GMT trays. So, which I guess I'll point out, my first exposure to those trays was actually from the gamers back in the day, not from GMT, but everybody calls them GMT trays nowadays. All right, so the first thing we notice, the box is about half full. So at a glance, it looks like you're going to be able to get at least 3 GMT counter trays in this box, which should be no problem for organization. So here's our little slip from Multiman telling us what ought to be here. 1 box and a lid, 4 22 by 34 inch map sheets, 5 counter sheets, 1 BCS 2.0 series rulebook, 1 BCS 2.0 support rulebook, 1 Valley of Tears game specific rulebook, 2 BCS 2.0 charts and tables, 3 player aid cards, 2 air displays, and 2 6-sided dice. So here are the 6-sided dice, the standard Multiman 6-sided dice. So I'll pull everything out of the box, and then we'll look at the components after I've kind of busted them out here. And on the very bottom, we do have Valley of Tears box errata. So the contents list on the back of the box shows an Arab player booklet and an Israeli player booklet, which do not exist. They're incorporated into the Valley of Tears game-specific rulebook. That's cool by me. All right, so this is a who cares level of errata here. But, you know, I'm glad that they put it in here just so people didn't get confused. All right, so first of all, we got the Valley of Tears rulebook. We get counter sheet, display, map, counter sheet, display, map, counter sheet, player aid card, display, map. I thought there was going to be 3 maps in here, to be honest. Here's a big book. Here's another counter sheet. Here's another display. Here's another book. Here's another map. And then we got one more. More displays and more player aid cards. So let's tackle these piles of components one at a time, and we will start with the maps. So I will cut away for a moment here, and well, I guess first of all, say we got a map C here. We have a Golan map. We have a map B, and we have a map A. So maps A through C, I think, are going to be the Sinai front. So one of the reasons why this is an interesting conflict is it's a 2-front war for the Israelis, right? On the one side, they're getting invaded by the Egyptians. On the other side, they're getting invaded by the Syrians. So there's sort of the Sinai front, which is going to be 3 maps, and the Golan front, which is going to be 1 map. Now, that's interesting from a game point of view as well, because it does mean that you're going to be able to play one front or the other very readily, and thus end up with a, you know, easier to manage game. So let's bust this out and see what this looks like. Don't see a map credit on here, but if I had to guess, I'd say these are probably DNSing maps. All right, so here is the Golan Heights map. And we can see here, I don't know a whole lot about this conflict, so if you're expecting in-depth historical analysis here today, you have come to the wrong place, but I'm sure that experience is available on YouTube somewhere. So a lot of the text is oriented vertically along the map, but some of it's not. And here's the titular Valley of Tears over here that I noticed. We've got some primary roads, some secondary roads, a fair amount of track. A lot of the terrain is what I take to be open desert, although I don't see a terrain key on here. So next, and there are, again, 4 maps in the game. This is the Golan map. So if you want a one-map experience of this, this is the map you'll use. So player aid cards and displays and other stuff. So one of the features of BCS is the fairly abstract air system. It essentially works exactly like artillery does in most games, but not in this game. This looks like it has an abstract, and maybe not less abstract than the other games in the series, air system, but there's more to it than just saying you got points here and points there. So the first thing we got that I will look at are the 2 identical BCS 2.0 charts and tables. So the BCS 2.0 rules are backwards compatible to all the older games in the system. I want to say that version of the rules debuted with Panzer's Last Stand. I could be wrong about that. If I am, let me know in the video description. It might have been Brazen Chariots, but I thought it was Panzer's Last Stand. This is, of course, an 11x17 folded in half type card. There's a lot of good information on here, and we found that virtually everything in the game runs off this player aid card. And there's some like informational stuff too that you maybe don't need tables for after you've been playing this for any length of time. Like fatigue increase, you pretty much get to know that very quickly. The snafu table, you pretty much get to know that. That's over here. You pretty much get to know that very quickly. 2 or less is a fail, 3 to 6 is a partial, 7 or more is a full. And then there's a bunch of DRMs here that apply. That once you start going through those DRMs, you internalize those fairly quickly as well. So in addition to so you put this whole thing together, and it's going to be a pretty big game in terms of footprint, because you've got 4 maps plus 5 displays, one of which of those is an 11x17 by itself. So we've got the 2 air displays, one for each front, actually, not one for the Arabs and one for the Israelis, but one for the Sinai front and one for the Golan front. You have an Arab player display right here. You have an Israeli player display right here, which is 2-sided. Are the 2 sides different? Maybe. I don't see where it says that on here, however. I have had no exposure to this game prior to opening it up at this very moment. So, all right, so these look the same to me. So in any event, you've got an Arab player display here, which is just one-sided. And again, this was broken down into 2 different fronts as well. You've got this Israeli display where presumably you've got an airlift track, so you can move units between the 2 fronts. And I'm sure there's a way to do that by moving stuff around on this display as well. You also have a turn record track, which looks like we have 1-day turns, generally speaking, in BCS, by the way. And looks like we've got from October 6th through October 27th of 1973. There's a daily snafu DRMs, which is interesting. Okay, so that's actually listed on here. Very good move. So on the left side is the Sinai front. On the right side is the Golan front. So we can see at the beginning, the Egyptians have a positive snafu DRM for the first 2 days of the campaign. The Israelis have a positive DRM for the first couple days of the campaign, and then they have some negatives, and then it flips back to positive. That's very interesting. And then on the Golan side, we have a situation where the Syrians have a no DRM to snafu at the very beginning, again, for the first 2 days, and then they have a -1 for pretty much the entire rest of the game. And the Israelis flip from +1 to 0 about 10 days in. So that's the snafu mechanic is, if you're not familiar with BCS, it's a formation by formation activation system, and you will roll each turn to activate a given unit. And that's the snafu roll. And the result of that snafu roll will tell you whether you get a full activation, a partial activation, or a shit sandwich. And if you have a shit sandwich, in most games in the series anyway, I don't know about this one, you can flip that failure to what we call a failure flip, which means it turns into a recovery activation, basically. We do have also, let's actually look at the books next, of which there are 3. One is, the first of those books is the BCS 2.0 series rules. Okay, so this is a game system design by Dean Essig, of course. And the introduction here will give you some interesting background here. There'll be extensive designer's notes in the back and some handy mnemonic aids that tell you what kind of units can do what kinds of things. That's a key component in BCS and actually making the system work, is realizing that, hey, your armor units are not exactly the same as infantry units with better movement and better attack values. They work differently. They can do different kinds of things at this scale, and this system reflects that. It's really neat. So the core system series rulebook is 48 pages on a semi-gloss stock, reasonably small print. It is full color. There's a reasonable number of illustrations and quite a lot of examples. Like I think a lot of Dean Essig, or for that matter, Mark Herman games, I find that careful reading of these rules is really, really, really helpful and important. So, highly recommended to carefully read these rules. I find that works best for me after I have played the game, or at least noodled around with it a little bit. You'll notice undoubtedly a large number of recognizable names in the testers pool here as well, which I found fairly interesting. So there is as well, I will point out that actual rules come out to, I think we should count odd situations. Actual rules come out to about 34.5 pages here with a couple of optional rules. We do get a glossary. There's some unique term and somewhat idiosyncratic terminology used in BCS. Highly recommended to examine this closely in detail as well. You'll need to know that some terminology has changed between the earliest editions of BCS, earliest versions of the rules, and the current version. Different types of AV. This will actually tell you which units correspond to which type of AV. AV is armor value, and it is another critically important piece of information that's on the counters to understand when you're playing BCS. If you have not seen it already, there's not a ton of tutorial material as such on YouTube. However, if you are interested in BCS, I highly recommend a tabletop, I highly recommend you check out the channel, The Tabletop's Edge, where he has a lot of playthrough videos of the first game in the series, Last Blitzkrieg, but using the 2.0 rules, which is critical. Because there's been a decent amount, I mean, it's not a vastly different system, but there's been a decent amount of changes and certainly clarifications between the older versions of BCS and version 2.0. Version 2.0 is the one you definitely want to play with, in my opinion, and I think most people are going to agree with that. So at the end, we also have an index, which is very well put together, actually having had to use it while we were playing Last Blitzkrieg, which is terrific. Again, you get this unit capabilities chart. Now, we also have the V2.0 series support book, and this is a really great piece of kit that MMP have put in here, and it basically gives you a bunch of additional resources for how to learn BCS and how to make BCS work for you. We've got some basic terminology stuff. If you want to get started, here's what the designer's notes are in here as well, by the way, and I highly recommend reading those. That's a general point, not limited to BCS. We also have read this first. This will tell you like a lot of the core concepts that are in use with BCS. We've got a BCS primer by Doug Fitch. Doug is the fellow who is behind the amazingly good YouTube channel, The Tabletop's Edge, so highly recommended to read this as well. You'll do yourself a lot of good by reading this article, right? This will talk about a whole bunch of good stuff, including, when to use prepared defense and a lot of other things. There's a complete activation example back here. It's not what I'd call a comprehensive example of play, but it will kind of walk you through an entire activation, which is pretty close. Here's an activation sequence flow chart, which I think is probably not necessary, but it's here. Here's the Zoc types and effects chart. So one of the idiosyncrasies of BCS, and one of the really interesting things about BCS is that there are multiple different types of Zocs. This is in itself not incredibly uncommon in wargaming, but here in BCS we have 5 different types of Zocs, some of which are not actually called Zocs. Engagement zones are not Zocs exactly, but they behave in some ways like Zocs. So we have an assignment procedure chart to assign or unassign units. You also need to carefully follow the sequence of play here, but that goes without saying, I think. Combat train movement flow chart, that's here. We have an attack type crib sheet. There are 7 different types or 6 different types of attacks in BCS because different units fight differently. That's super interesting. And it's here. And here's unit skills. These are not the same chart. This is unit skills and vulnerabilities as opposed to unit capabilities over here. Now we also have the BCS Valley of Tears game-specific rulebook. I will point out, if I have not already mentioned it, that the game design here is by Carl Fung. Carl has been working on a game on this topic for many, many years. And at one point, and I think I had heard this in the past, and Carl reminded me of it in a recent stream, that this was at one point going to be an OCS game, which I think would have been interesting, actually, but it turned into a BCS game somewhere along the way in the last few years. So game designed by Carl Fung, series designed by Dean Essig, graphics, it says Dean Essig, box art, Nico Scooby. I take that graphics, I take to mean maps and counters. And certainly the map looks like a Dean map to me. Plus a pile of playtesters. Vassal module by Jim Powell. I don't know if the Vassal module is available yet, but it ought to be pretty soon if it isn't now. So the Valley of Tears game-specific book is on the same paper, it feels like anyway. Yeah. Same satin finish paper, again, 48 pages. Also full color with some pictures and stuff like that. Game-specific actual rules appear to amount to about 10 pages. 10 and a half, 10. New series rules. Okay, that's interesting. Are these in the book for the series rules? Or I'll have to examine exactly to what extent these are new. And then we get into scenarios after that. So this follows the very standard game-specific rules format where we have some super duper basics, common special rules, some things about how the series rules specifically apply to this. We will get to here Arab special rules, Israeli special rules, and then victory conditions. And then we will get into some optional rules here. Now, game scenarios, 6.1. This is the Yom Kippur War. I'm not sure if it's Yom Kippur or Yom Kippur, but I've always said Yom Kippur. I don't know. This is the 2-front campaign. So this is going to be all 4 maps. Now, the maps are not contiguous in the sense that there's no like direct land link between the Golan map and the Sinai maps. So there's no reason you got to have them all on the same table. So that does increase flexibility considering that you're setting up a 4-map game here. So first turn is 6 October, last turn C4.2. I assume that the scale here is 1 mile per hex. Air units represent 12 aircraft for the Israelis and 24 aircraft for the Arabs. I don't see that the turns are 1-day turns, but I believe that that is accurate based on what I saw on the turn record track where it starts on October 6th. So, and that matches up with the rest of the series too. So, this can go any number of turns. Let's take a look at that actually. 4.2. So, unless somebody gives up, the game will end no earlier than October 20th. So, minimally, you're going to get 14 turns out of this, which is pretty tight. So, here's on the banks of the Suez. This is the Sinai front campaign, and this is going to be 3 maps. So if you just want to play one of the 2 fronts, you can do that. Here's the Golan front campaign, and that's just going to be 1 map. Iraqi intervention. The Israelis conducted a counteroffensive into Syria After stopping the threat in the Golan Heights, with forces moving toward Damascus, a new enemy appeared that would divert the Israelis' attention. The Iraqis had arrived, followed later by a Jordanian contingent. The Arabs were joining forces in order to defeat their common enemy. Okay, so it sounds like we got Iraqi units in the game, is what that sounds like. Operation Stout-Hearted Man, that is part of Map B, and that is a 4 or 5 turn scenario. Five turns on that. Iraqi Intervention is just one map on the Golan map, and it's 5 turns. It's typical for gamers' games to have an excellent to more excellent scenario selection. Let me put it that way. All right, so we've got Africa, which is maps B and C. So this is after the Israeli breakout, or after an Israeli breakout into out of the Sinai, as it were. Okay, so we're now done with the scenarios here. We've got a big glossary. This will tell you what the unit abbreviations on the counters mean. We've got designer's notes from Carl. And again, as usual, the designer's notes, historical notes in here, which I have taken a peek at already, are excellent. So well worth reading, especially if you, like me, don't know very much about this conflict. Now, there's been, I feel like a lot of games on this conflict. That's not really true in an absolute sense. There haven't been that many games on it, but there's never been a real shortage of or absence of games on the Arab-Israeli Wars either, at least since the early 70s. So, or at least the mid to late 70s anyway. So there's a fair number of games on this topic, including some classics like Barlev, for example. The original Barlev was from GDW or Conflict Games. There's Arab-Israeli Wars, which is an adaptation of the Panzer Blitz rules. That's more tactical, from Avalon Hill. We've got Order of Battle notes, minor Arab forces. Okay. Here's some discussion of aircraft in 1973. I'm very curious to see how the aircraft system works here. Super special thanks to a variety of folks. Here's an annotated bibliography. Always great to see. It's an extensive annotated bibliography, I will also point out. We have the order of arrival. This will tell us when stuff shows up. Here's the Arab order of arrival. And on the back, we have the terrain effects chart. I would like to see this on a player aid card, because using the book for this, I felt like was not as easily handleable as I'd like it to be. A lot of new terrain types for BCS in here. Now, this is something that varies from game to game, though, right? There's not like a core terrain versus game-specific terrain. It's kind of all game-specific terrain, and it varies greatly by which game we're talking about. So 3 big books here, a lot of material, and a really nice overall treatment from a physical component standpoint from MMP. So, counter sheets. There are, as previously mentioned, 5 counter sheets, of which 2 are the standard BCS marker sheets. I might be nuts, but I feel like these are a little shinier than they have been in the recent past. But like I said, I might be nuts. This is on the thicker white core stuff that MMP's been using for the last several years. These rotary markers, I alternately call them rotary markers. They are, in fact, called Pollard markers that indicate the steps that the unit has taken in damage. But we use the sheets, the sheets with the check boxes. I don't know if that's available yet for Valley of Tears, but it is for all the other games in the series. So you get 2 of these. We also found a shortage of prepared defense markers, but that was, to be fair, in last Blitzkrieg, where there's a huge number of units in a long campaign. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3 counter sheets of units. So I am going to take, yes, indeed. So the blue units are the Israelis. And like the recent games in the series, we have identifying colored stripes on the counters to tell you what formation those belong to, in addition to having independent units, which may or may not be attachable depending on the game-specific rules. We also have some traffic markers. You probably don't need 10 traffic markers at any given type, at any given turn, but maybe I'm wrong on that. I haven't played this yet, so we'll see. Here's airlift points over here. Here's an orange unit. I'm not sure who that is. This stuff is actually errata for Panzer's Last Stand, so that's interesting. I'll have to incorporate that into my Panzer's Last Stand stuff. So you could see that we've got a decent number of different formations here, and mostly these appear to be divisions. There's a couple of armored brigades and or paratrooper brigades as well. So mostly the units are in BCS will be divisions or brigades or sometimes regiments. All right, so here we have one of the two Arab factions, and I don't know enough about the conflict to tell you who this is. I would think these are the Egyptians, and these are the Syrians down here. Yes, that is actually accurate. So the sort of butternut, I'll say, is the Egyptian color. And again, the Egyptians have plenty of different formations as well. And as you can see, there are quite a few aircraft, and you'll see a lot of Soviet aircraft designations on here because they got their aircraft from the Soviets. And then these are going to be the Syrians in this more sort of brick brown type of color. And they're going to have mostly Soviet aircraft as well. There's also some Iraqi and Algerian aircraft. I don't see any Jordanians. I'm not sure who these bright green individuals are. But these yellows are the Saudis. This color are the Iraqis. And here's the Jordanians, should they intervene. And there's Moroccans as well, actually. And we've got special rotary markers for artillery. That's actually also interesting. And we have another pile of traffic markers for the Egyptians and the Syrians as well, which is interesting. So this has been taken long enough that I'm going to put this back together off camera. But this has been a quick look at the brand new, almost on the anniversary of the conflict, Valley of Tears BCS Battalion Combat Series game from Multi-Man Publishing. Game designer Carl Fung, series designer Dean Essig. Looks very promising, and this may, in fact, I mean, we have already decided that we're definitely getting back to BCS because we liked it a ton. This may end up being that game. I think I'm finding this more intriguing at this exact moment than Panzer's Last Stand. So I might change my mind on that. That's also plausible, but looks super interesting. This is going to be my game on this topic, although it's not the only game I have on this topic, but I don't need any more. This is not one of my prime areas of interest. I feel like this is going to give me everything I need out of Arab-Israeli wars as a wargaming topic and then some. So I'm super happy to receive it, and it looks fantastic. So I would like to give a special shout out to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, without whose assistance, support, and encouragement it would be impossible to continue doing the things that we do here at the channel. So thank you, patrons. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to become a patron of Ardwulf's Lair, there are links to do that in the video description, as well as links to the merch store and the Ko-Fi. So if you'd like to do more to support the channel, please check those things out. Once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, happy wargaming.